I want to say good morning to all of you. Good morning to everybody tuning in online. I'm so glad to be here. I'm glad because last night I didn't sleep super well, and I happened to wake up right at 6:15, wondering why my alarm wasn't going off, because I set my alarm for 6:15, but I didn't realize I set it for 6:15 p.m. But strangely, I didn't sleep super well, happened to wake up at 6:15 anyhow, and I was thinking, I probably would have slept till 8:30, 9 o'clock. The guys would have been texting me, hey, are you preaching today? Would have loved to have you here at this point. But I just see God's goodness, even little things like that, how He orchestrates and He makes sure that His plan is still moving. And that's what I want to do this morning, celebrate and praise God for the good things that He's doing. When I look back at this series, we've been through this summer series looking at the songs, looking at the book of Psalms in the Old Testament of the Bible. And most of the songs that we have chosen have been songs that have a context of negativity. They've been songs that really deal with issues, struggles that the songwriters were dealing with. So in that, as I look back at all of our opening illustrations, most of it, you maybe can remember or go check out online, most of our intros have been about the negativity in our culture right now. Most of our intros have been about the struggle, whether it's societal struggle or personal struggle. And what I want to do this morning is kind of shift gears a little bit and reflect on the goodness of God, the good things that God is doing. Because the truth is, even in the midst of the shutdown, even in the midst of all of the negativity in our society, God is still at work. God is still doing great things, amazing things within our world and within our community. Here's just a few of them. We've been just celebrating as a team that in this quarantine, there have been so many people who have connected with us online who have never connected with us before. Some all over our nation. I know that I have family members out in Ohio who are connecting. I've heard other stories of people who are connecting. And our prayer, our desire is that every individual who's connecting from a distance would find a church family that can pour into their lives and that they can connect with, and that we would be supplemental material for that. But we're just seeing people connect in so many different ways. In some cases, people who have never been to church before, they're making a connection with the church through our online service. We've heard stories of individuals who in this time, God has captured their heart and drawn them closer to Him and His Word, whether through preaching of the Word or their own personal study of the Word. We've heard of young men who God has captured their heart. You've seen some of it. If you've been watching online during some of the shutdown, you've seen two testimonies of young men who have committed their lives to follow Jesus Christ, and through baptism have declared, we want to tell everybody that we're committed to follow Jesus Christ. We have stories of other individuals who God has stirred in their hearts. We have a story of a family, and hopefully in the near future you'll get to hear from them, that God gripped them in the midst of this season. The father got saved. His wife got saved, their children got saved. They all responded to the call of Jesus Christ in their life, and God is stirring in them. We have stories of young men who attend our youth group here, who God has gripped their hearts and they've committed to follow Him. Some of those young guys, they've served on our tech team throughout this entire time. Week in and week out, they're here serving, and God is stirring in their lives. God is doing amazing things. I also heard, and I just want to share this, a friend of mine, who for years, he and his wife have been trying to have children, and it got to this point where the doctors were basically telling them, you will not have any children. I just heard during this quarantine that his wife is pregnant. God is doing miraculous things. He is still at work, and we wanted to take a moment. I'm going to direct your attention to the screen because we wanted to give you just a snippet of some of the good things God is doing within our community. Check this out.
God has worked in my life through this season by allowing much needed time in His Word, listening to more songs to feed my spirit, more family time, and just being still. Listening and becoming bolder to share about the God who holds the whole world in His hands.
I always went to church, but I never really knew what church meant. Until last year, I've seen God put so many different people into my life to give change in my life. I always knew that I would never be alone.
being really grateful for God's provision through this season of COVID, standing firm in His truth, really clinging to His spirit of power. And 2 Timothy 17 that tells us, "For God did not give us a spirit of fear, but one of power, of love, and of a sound mind."
Our greatest blessing through all of this is that we started a new tradition. As a family, we all come out into the living room each night and we sit in a circle and we thank God for what we're grateful for, and we ask God for help for whatever is weighing on our heart.
At the end of the day, though, it brings us together as a family when we sit down and we say our prayers as a family.
Hi, my name's Tyler. I grew up my whole life in the church, but when I turned the age to make my own decisions, I started to push God away from me, and I started doing things that I now look back on with regret. And it wasn't until the youth group's winter side quest just before COVID hit that I really felt God around me, and I felt Him working in my life when He sent one of my closest friends to inspire me to turn back to Him. Quarantine has given me plenty of opportunities to read my Bible and pray, which is something that I haven't really been doing before then. And I haven't felt better in my life, and God has shown me that His arms are always open to run back to.
God is at work. And the question that we are left with is, will we see God's miracles as simply distant memories or measures of the future? What I mean by that is, will we see what God has done and forget about them, let them just be things of the past? Or will we see what God has done as realities of what He's going to do moving forward? We have a choice in that. What I want to do is, this morning I want to dive into a psalm. Psalm 126 is one of the Psalms of Ascent, the songs of ascent that I shared with you a couple weeks ago, that a young Jewish man or woman would sing as they were traveling back to Jerusalem. And in it, the psalmist he's wrestling with that question. Will God's miraculous things simply be memories? Or will they be measures of the future? Will they remind me of something greater that God is still going to do? Listen to what he says. Psalm 126, verse 1. He says, "When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dreamed. Our mouths were filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them." The phrase that he uses, "when the Lord restored our fortunes," could also be translated, "when the Lord brought the captives back." Both are true. If God brings captives or frees captives, that's a restoration of fortune. He says, when the Lord restored our fortunes. And we're not given necessarily a whole lot of context of when this occurred or what he's talking about. But many believe that this restoration of fortune, this freedom of the captives, was when God brought His people, the nation of Israel, out of bondage to the Assyrians, to the Persians, to the Babylonians, back to their city, Jerusalem, to rebuild the temple, rebuild the city, rebuild the walls. And that's the context in which the songwriter is reflecting upon. Now, I want you to think about this. If you get a chance, in the Old Testament, there are two writers, a man by the name of Ezra and a man by the name of Nehemiah. They were both involved in the process of returning. So the nation of Israel, even though they were brought out of slavery to Egypt and brought into their own land, eventually they would reject God and choose their own direction, and God would take them back into captivity. But in time, He would restore them and bring them back to their homeland. And in that time, the Persians are in control and they give freedom. You read about it. If you go and read Ezra and Nehemiah, you'll see this reality. God sends them back through the Persian leaders, but not only does He allow them to return, to restore their city, restore their temple, He uses the Persian leaders to fund it. He sends troops from the Persian leaders, and the Persian leaders call for everybody, all the nations surrounding them who despise them and didn't want the rebuild to happen, to fund and make sure it happened. In fact, you'll find in there a letter that was written by one of the Persian leaders in which he said, if any man or any person opposes this decree, opposes the rebuilding of the city, a beam from their house should be ripped out, they should be impaled upon it, and their entire house be made rubble. That's a man who doesn't even believe in their God, who doesn't support their God. And yet he writes a decree. So when the authors when the songwriter's writing here, when you restored our fortune, it was like it was a dream. It was that to them because they're looking and saying, this doesn't make sense. Everything that was happening for them was divine. It was beyond human interaction. It was beyond human perception. God was doing something that was bigger than them. What I recognize is that God is not bound by the circumstances of men. God is never in quarantine. God is not bound by viruses. God is not bound by politicians. God is not bound by economies. He's not bound by anything. And God still works, and when He works, it's in a way that we can't even make sense of it. It's bigger than our own perspectives. And the songwriter says it was like we were dreaming, because what was happening, we couldn't even understand it. Guys, our heart for CFC is that God would do something here that is bigger than our staff, bigger than our pastors, bigger than any individual in this church, that anybody looking in could say, only God could have done that. That's our desire for this church. And if you have been struck by the grace of God, the things that He talks about, they are true for you. He says we were like those who laughed, filled with joy. It was like we were dreaming. He says others looked from the outside in and they were saying God has done some amazing things for them. I want you to think back. If you've been struck by God's grace, and I don't mean just you heard of it, you understood it. I mean you've been struck by it. That God's grace so hit you, you so understood it, that it rocked you. And if that hasn't happened, I pray today that would be the day that that happens. That you would understand that even though we had sinned against God, God in His great love sent His Son to pay the penalty for that sin so that you and I could be restored to the Father. If you've been struck by that grace, think back to that moment. Think back to the moment when God's grace so hit you. How did you feel? For me, it doesn't make any sense. I understand when the songwriter says we were dreaming. It felt like a dream. Because when I think about God's grace in my life, I don't understand it. Why me, God? Why would you choose me? Why would you love me? Those are the questions that I ask. That's grace. It's not that I deserved it. It's that God in His goodness and His love offered it freely to me. Think about the feeling as he talks about we were like those with joy and laughter. Think back to that moment when you were struck by God's grace. It's like a young man whose crush finally said yes to him. That feeling of joy and inner peace, that feeling of excitement that you can't explain, you can't express. And perhaps when that happened in your life, other people could look from the outside in and say, God's done something or something's happened with them. That's the attitude that the songwriter's writing with. As he reflects on what God has done, he says, we can't make sense of this. And I choose that when I say, are we going to look at God's miracles as distant memories or measures of the future? I use the term miracle because there's nothing other than a miracle when God takes somebody who is dead in their sins and makes them alive. You can't say anything other than a miracle than when God takes an enemy of Him and turns them into a child. That's the miraculous. But here's the problem. The miraculous too quickly becomes distant memories. Too quickly do the good things that God has done in our lives become forgotten. Things of the past. And that's how the psalm writer begins this song. The terminology, the verbiage he uses is speaking as if it's in the past. We all know that world, right? Think about parents. Parents, you know what it's like. You take your kids out for a treat, or maybe you even plan this massive vacation, and the whole vacation's for them, and you're going to do all of these amazing events, and there's time throughout the week or during that vacation that your kids are so excited, your family's super happy, it's a wonderful time, and then something happens, and all of a sudden, you're the worst parent in the world. And you're thinking in your head, have you forgotten what I just did for you? Or maybe bring home flowers for your wife, and she's grateful for those flowers, and then the next day you come home, and she's upset with you. You don't know why she's upset with you, and she won't talk to you, and you're thinking, did you forget? Or you go out, and you bring home for your husband his favorite treat, Chipotle, or a Reese's egg. That's not specific at all. Not specific at all. And the next day he's not gentle with you and kind and caring, and you're thinking, did you forget? Or how many of you spent the whole weekend helping your friend move, and then the next day you see them on Facebook posting, I don't have any friends. And you're like, did you forget? We know that world where even not so distant interactions can become distant, forgotten memories. And the songwriter writes from the perspective of those things being forgotten. They're in the past. God has done great things. And too often, when we let the miracles of God become distant memories, we find ourselves living in brokenness and loss and lies. You ever been in a funk? And I'm not talking like 70s funk, like negative funk. You ever been in a funk? Too often I find myself in a funk, and I don't even know why I'm there. I don't know why I'm thinking the way I'm thinking. Recently I was in one. I found myself just like spinning all of these lies in my head, spinning all of these things that just weren't true, where I kept saying to myself, like, I pour out for everybody else, I do for everybody else, but nobody does for me, and nobody cares for me, and nobody does anything for me. And as I drove deeper into those lies, the deeper I drove into depression. You know who Jesus says the devil is? He is the father of lies. All he does is speak lies. How do you combat lies? You combat it with truth. How did Jesus combat the father of lies? He combated him with truth. So I began thinking of truth. What is true in my life? Because the truth is that I can't measure the amount of good things God's people within His church have done for me over the years. There's an individual family in my life who comes to this church. And for years I've been going to them for repair service. And I'm going to share this story, and they probably wouldn't want me to share this story, but I'm going to do it anyhow because I stand up here and I get that chance. I've been going to them for years to service my lawnmower. And one of the great blessings, when I moved, I bought my house in Burnville. My friend Jake had an extra mower, and he's like, hey, I got this mower. You want it? I'm like, yeah, I want it. So I had this mower. And for years, I'd take it up for them to service. And the one year, just last year, I took it up to them to have it serviced. And I get a call or a text from one of the young guys who works there, and he said, hey, your mower's ready. So I went up to pick up my mower, and he comes walking out with a brand new Honda, and I push mow. I don't have a big yard. He comes walking out with a brand new Honda, and he's like, here's your mower. It's all ready. I'm like, ha, that's funny, man. And I start walking into the facility. He's like, no, I'm serious. Here's your mower. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is your mower. I got it all ready for you. And the reality is, what he doesn't understand is that so shook me that I wept driving home. I wept over a lawnmower. And every time I cut my grass, every week I cut my grass, I pray for him and his wife because of the goodness that they've brought into my life. Because when I think of truth, what is true? God has been doing and continues to do amazing things in my life. And I can sit in the lies and tell myself lies and allow the devil to speak lies. Or I can believe that what God has done is simply a measure of what He's going to do in the future. Notice the songwriter shifts. He begins by saying, then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. He speaks externally. He speaks about others looking from the outside in, but then he makes this shift. He says, the Lord has done great things for us. It's no longer somebody outside looking in. It's him looking at what's true. The Lord has done great things for us, and we are filled with joy. Before he was speaking about we were filled with joy. We did have laughter. He says, no, this is personal. God has done great things for us, and we are today, presently, filled with joy because God is continuing to do great things. He makes this move from God being a God of distant miracles to those miracles being measures of the future. Guys, which will we choose as a church? God has done great things in this church. God is doing great things in this church, and God will do great things in this church. The question is, which will we choose? And the truth of the matter is, does God in that sometimes do it in spite of us? No. He always does it in spite of us. It has always been the reality that God has been strong in our weakness. It has always been the reality that we can do nothing without Jesus. It has always been the reality that God produces fruit. And I look at what the songwriter is saying here and I realize that these things are not simply distant memories that God used to do great things at CEFC. God is going to do great things and is presently doing great things. He transitions, he says, restore. Based on what you've done, God, based on who you are, I see those measures of the future. He began asking for more of those measures. He says, God, restore our fortunes. Remember how he began the song? When you restored our fortunes. Now what does he ask for? God, restore our fortunes. Keep doing what you've been doing. Keep being who you are. Like streams in the Negev, those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. He said, you restored before, restore again. You've set captives free before, set captives free again. He looked and said, I see that your work, God, are just simply measures of what you're going to do in the future. That when he talks about dry places, when he talks about the Negev, he's speaking about the dry desert land in their society, in their environment. And what he's saying is that in the times of the rainy season, those dry places would instantly become flooded rivers. He's saying, I choose to recognize that dry places are potentially rivers. It says, those who go out and sow with tears will come back with their arms filled. He recognizes and challenges us to recognize that dry places are potential rivers, and the faithfulness to sow is certain prelude to harvest. That if we are faithful to do what God has called us to do, we will come back with our arms full. We are in a dry place right now. For 5+ months, we've been in a dry place. The ground is untended. Nobody's able to do anything. And we can look at that and say, it's all distant memories. All the goodness of God is gone. Or we can look at that and say, these dry places are potential rivers. In this season, people's hearts are being opened to God. In the midst of the struggle and the concern and the fear and the doubt, people are beginning to ask questions. People are beginning to search for answers. People are beginning to search for something bigger than politicians, bigger than American dreams. They're searching for something to give answers to what's happening. And that's a dry place, but a potential river. And in the process, if we are faithful to sow, faithful to do what God has asked us to do, God will bring about a harvest. The reason we can see God's miracles as potential rivers, as potential harvest, because He's promised it will be. God has said that He will finish the work that He started in us. God has said, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. God has said, my word will not return unto me void or empty. It will accomplish what I set it out to accomplish. God has said that He will establish His kingdom. God has said that He will come back and make right what is wrong. God has said that He will set captives free. The reason that I could look at this and say this is simply a measure of the future, because God has promised that it's simply a measure of the future. He's promised that He's going to do something. I just want to be a part of it. Guys, the question that we must ask is, will we see God's miracles as just distant memories? Or will we see them as measures of the future? Perhaps in this season, we need to pray for bigger things. We pray for fortunes restored, but our perspective of fortune is typically lost retirement, finances. But what if we prayed for greater fortunes? What if we prayed for those in this season who are being captive, being held captive by depression and loneliness and addiction, that they would be set free? What if we prayed that those who have lost fortune in the good world that God has created because of their sin, that they would be restored to that goodness through faith in Jesus Christ? What if we prayed for greater fortunes? These dry places are potential rivers. In the dry places of your life right now, look for potential rivers. You can focus on the dry place, or you can look for what God might be doing in that dry place to bring about something huge, something that transcends human nature. Stay faithful to sow. Some of you, perhaps you've been sowing into a friend or family or somebody's life, praying for them, speaking the truth to them, sharing the gospel with them. I know of individuals who've done that for family members for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. And in 40 years, I have a friend, a mentor of mine, he prayed for his brother for 40 years. In 40 years, his brother came to a conference with him, heard the gospel, received the gospel message, and gave his life to Jesus Christ. That's 40 years of faithfully sowing, but believing that God would bring a harvest. Stay faithful to sow and speak. Remind each other of the dry places that have become rivers. Remind each other of the measures of God's miracles. When you see God do something miraculous, tell somebody about it. Share it, because we need to, in this dry moment of America, we need to be reminded that God is still at work and doing massive things, because He is. So what I've asked, we're going to close a little differently this morning. I've asked my team to come. The band's going to come up and they're going to lead in a song. And this song that we're going to sing is based on a very specific text in the Scripture. So as God was establishing His people, Israel, He gave a leader to them, a man by the name of Moses, and Moses wrote down directives for them. And in those directives, he writes specifically to the priests what they should and shouldn't do, how they should direct. And he tells them to go speak a blessing over his people. In Numbers chapter 6, verse 22, it says this: the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron and his sons, and Aaron and his sons are the priests. They're the beginning of the priesthood for the nation of Israel. This is how you are to bless the Israelites. Say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn His face towards you and give you peace, so they will put my name on the Israelites, and I will bless them. Now, there are blessings that God made to the nation of Israel that are not ours to claim. But there are blessings that God has promised for His church. And what I want to do is gather together and singing this song in declaration and asking that God would continue to restore fortunes, that God would continue to set captives free, that He would do what He said He would do, that He would keep doing what He's been doing and is doing into our future, that we would sing it as a declaration and a request for God to be everything that He said He would be, that this would be a declaration that we believe God's miracles are not distant memories, they are measures of what God is going to do in the future. Would you guys stand and sing that with us?